name is Yusuf Abdul Wahab. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the December edition of the Nextier Power Dialogue. You're all welcome to the Nextier Power Dialogue. So, as you all know, the Nextier Power Dialogue is a monthly public discourse that's with three main objectives, which is to share ideas and information about the power sector and also advocate for policy positions in the power sector and to highlight key business information and opportunities in the sector. The theme for this section is we are here to evaluate the federal government financial intervention in Nigeria's power sector, which aims to review the strategy and rationale for this intervention, as well as its impact on the sustainability of the sector. Solutions, models to increase efficiency levels through effective contract and market discipline will also be discussed during our discussions here tonight. In order to increase audience participation and welcome and make the dialogue more interactive, in addition to normal floor questions, please you can check the back of your pamphlet. Like there's a dedicated WhatsApp number whereby you can send your questions to. If you have any questions, like maybe during the conversation, you can send your questions to. But please, try and include your name and designation at the end of the section. And at the end of the question, then send to the number when the floor is open for questions. To drive the interaction tonight, as moderator, we have Mr. Dozier Okpa-Bioleri. Mr. Dozier is a corporate attorney. Please welcome Mr. Dozier. Mr. Dozier is a corporate attorney providing advisory services in the energy sector with emphasis on the petroleum sector in West Africa. He has substantial experience in mergers and acquisition, private equity and corporate governance, with a focus on acquisition and divestitures, project finance and private equity transactions. His specialties include providing advisory services in the energy sector to African governments. He holds a Juris Doctor from the Northwestern University School of Law and a Master's in International Economics and Finance from Brandeis University in Massachusetts. He also holds a bachelor's degree in economics from Northwestern University. He was editor-in-chief of the Northwestern Journal of International Law and Business at the Northwestern University, and is also a member of the American Bar Association and the Chicago Bar Association. Once again, thank you for coming, and join me in welcoming the moderator to the platform. Thank you very much.
Okay, good evening, everyone. That was a bit of a long bio. Welcome, everyone, to this December edition of the Power Dialogue. I'd like to immediately call my panelists to the podium, and I will start with Folake Shoeton, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Ikeja Electric. Please give her a round of applause. Folake joined Sahara Group in 2009 and worked on a turnaround project in Ghana. I suppose Ikeja Electric will use that skill in hopefully turning around the disco and maybe impacting other discos. But at Ikeja Electric, Folake leads a team of 2,000 people tasked with developing and implementing strategies that would help to reduce AT&T, or rather that has helped to reduce AT&T, ATC&C losses from about 40% to 26% in 4 years. And welcome her to the podium. Thank you. Next, not in any particular order, but next is Benibo Boma Vincent, who is the Head Infrastructure Finance Office at the Central Bank of Nigeria. He's the 7th executive of the Central Bank with over 30 years experience in development financing and has been a pioneer of many of the initiatives, some of which we're going to be discussing today. He currently heads the Infrastructure Finance Office in the Development Finance Department of the CBN, overseeing CBN interventions in the power sector. So that's the PIF, the NEMS, and the MBET PAF. And he currently represents the CBN on the Federal Government Power Sector Recovery team. Please welcome Mr. Boma Vincent to the podium. Next is my good friend, Mr. Yuji Mohammed, who is the Managing Director and CEO of the Transmission Company of Nigeria. Mr. Yuji Mohammed, please give him a round of applause as he walks to the podium. Yuji was the Principal Power Utility Transformation Specialist at the African Development Bank prior to his role at TCN. He joined the service of the ADB, or AFDB, in 2009 and worked in various senior management roles, including financial control and power utility policy and transformation. And since joining TCN, obviously as MD CEO, you've seen quite a number of changes and progress there. I'm also happy to announce that recently, in addition to all the other resources, financing that has been pledged to TCN, the African Development Bank recently approved, just last week actually, $210 million for further work on our transmission lines, and I'm sure he will talk more about that. I think we are also expecting Mr. Chiedu Ubo, who is the MD CEO of NDPHC, that's the Niger Delta Power Holding Company. At this current time, he's facing, I suppose, the Senate panel at the National Assembly. And if he's able to get through that in good time, I'm sure he'll be joining us. So please give my panelists a round of applause. As you all know, we're here to evaluate the FGN's financial intervention in the power sector. Obviously, we've heard of the different amounts have been going into the sector. If you even go far back, there are all kinds of numbers that have been thrown around. And I'm sure Nigerians often wonder, with all this money floating in the power sector, why do we still not, well, the man on the street will probably say, why do I still not have consistent power? But we're going to be focusing more on the more recent interventions, the 213 billion, the 701 billion payment assurance guarantee, and recently the government has just recently approved, I think, another 600 billion, and we will be discussing the impact of those interventions by the government. Over the next 15 minutes, each of my panelists will have a chance to make some opening remarks. I'll implore that you take 5 minutes each. Once your time is done, I'm going to have to do a polite cutting off. So I suppose I could say ladies first. So Folake?
It doesn't really matter though.
So just a quick 5 minutes opening presentation, particularly on the subject matter for today, which is the intervention of the sector and whether that has been impactful.
Okay. All right. I'll first start by talking about what was the need for the intervention. Why was there a need for the government to put an intervention, and what is the reason why we have a financial crisis in the sector? The reason why we have a crisis is because of a deliberate action by key stakeholders based on socioeconomic factors, to not make the market cost effective or not make it a viable entity. It's been 6 years now since privatization has happened, and ideally, if you're selling a product, you should sell a product based on market realities, so the market forces should work. But because a decision was taken not to follow the market forces, there is a shortfall. So in simple terms, going by the whole chain, from the gas suppliers to the GENCOs to the transmission companies, the cost of the product is higher than the cost that is being sold. And that's the reason for the shortfall. And because that shortfall is there has to be an intervention. And of course, that intervention is what we're here to discuss today. The question is that intervention sustainable? Is that intervention going to solve our problem? What do we need to do to make sure that we get to the root cause of the problem and take the bold step that is required by all stakeholders to ensure that we don't depend on the intervention. I think that's what today is about for me.
All right, fair enough. Thank you, Falake, for that brief introduction. I'm going to now turn to Mr. Eugene Mohammed to give us his 5 minutes intro.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I think this is the third time I've appeared at this place, and I think I've spoken in so many places. What is very clear is that in Nigeria we talk so much and we do less. We don't do much. Because the level of discussion and talk that we have done on the power sector at least is supposed to be on a sustainable path now. Unfortunately, every time we are talking, we don't implement anything. First of all, why do we have the problem we have? First of all, we have a problem with our privatization where we have handed over discourse to companies that are not qualified, as to say, at the time we did it. Because we allow what they call, we reduce the qualification criteria by allowing what they call technical partnership, which is a loose relationship that has no responsibility on the side of technical partners. So most of the technical partners are either left or they have sent old people to support our discourse, and therefore they are not meeting their responsibility under the market. Now, if you look at all the intervention that is done by central bank, including the 213 billion, the 700, and the 600 billion, all of these are financing what? They are financing symptoms of the power sector reform, meaning the bad symptom. None of them is bringing any kilowatt hour or megawatt hour on the table. So we'll spend this money and we'll be at 4,000 megawatt. We are not going to extend anything. So this is what we are. Now, if you look at the discourse also as they are now, when they did the payment, this World Bank Privatization Support Program, PSP, I was one that criticized that PSP. I said this PSP will not work. The simple basis of why the PSP will not work, I said if you activate those contracts, because you said that if you give cost-reflective tariff, then the contract will become effective, then everybody will pay his bill. But I said if you activate the contract at that time, that was 2017, maybe one disco will survive, all the others will die. Now, how will you manage a situation where all the discourse will not succeed? So for you to do that, you need to do certain things to strengthen the discourse. And that was the reason why we suggested recapitalization of the discourse. We didn't say recapitalization only. We say you do recapitalization, and then you have to do cost-reflective tariff, and then you have to do regulatory consistency, and you have to also comply with the ECOWAS directive of competitive procurement of services. That's what we said. Now, if you look at the recent action by NAC, it confirmed what we said in 2017. And what is the action? NAC did minimum remittance for the discourse. They did consultation and did everything. The first month, 8 discourse out of 11 defaulted, and they issue order that they're going to revoke their license. Now, that was the first month. That was in July. As of today, only one disco has 100% payment. That is for the 3 months, only one disco. So are you going to kill all the discos? It's not going to be possible because they are regulated monopoly. So this is why we are saying, instead of government financing interventions that are financing symptoms, government should put money in where we'll solve the problem. So instead of putting this money in this intervention, why not capitalize the discourse and government should bring their own 40%? That's what we are saying. And let's simulate the tariff on the basis of that and let everybody pay. The issue of saying that poor people will not pay is not true. If you look at Abuja here now, I can tell you with empirical evidence that the poor are paying cost-reflective tariff. Because if you look at areas where the poor are living, you discover that they don't have meters. And they are paying on estimate. And these are the places where you have what they call auto-recloser. They close them and give them 5 hours of electricity all the time and charge them on estimate. Which means if you are looking at the number of hours they receive electricity and what they consume and what they are paying, they are actually paying cost-reflective tariff. So that is why. So this elephant called cost-reflective tariff. And a decision, we have to take a decision. We will blow the 600 billion, no single megawatt will add again, and we will again look for another money to support the sector. This is the problem.
Thank you, Mr. Eugene Mohammed. There's quite a bit of meat in what you've just said. Well, we'll come back to that once we have the last intro. So can I ask Mr. Benibo Vincent to do his 5 minutes?
Thank you very much for inviting the central bank to be at this forum, because a lot of times we have received the bashing because we rarely talk. We are very conservative. So this is an opportunity for us to let the public know, why should the central bank intervene in any way? Why the central bank? What have we done so far? Is there any impact? These are questions I'll try to answer, having been in development financing for the number of years mentioned. First, we must know that the central bank looks at the bigger picture, and that picture is the macroeconomy. We looked at monetary and price stability, and we see that the power premium adds to 20 to 30% to the cost of production in Nigeria. So even before privatization in 2010, we looked at the country and we saw that industries were moving out of Nigeria. And we did something to be able to ensure that companies stay here and that companies produce. That was the Power and Airline Intervention Fund. Under that particular scheme, we'll come to the outcomes, but we were able to ensure that there is incremental power and captive power that will support most of our industries that we have. But when we look at the economy again, we discover that 37 million MSMEs are in this economy. They account for more than 84% of the jobs and 48.5% of the GDP. You cannot definitely ignore such a large number of people. Captive power can't solve that. And therefore, there is need to look at what is happening in the power sector. It led us to begin to listen to what the privatization issues were. Like my friend said, the problems that they had immediately after privatization. And then we mobilized the banks to make available 213 billion naira. But when this 213 billion naira was made available, it was a calculated amount. This amount was derived from legacy gas debts, shortfalls due to the tariff, and other things which the regulatory authority identified. There were debts owed to the power sector players, the value chain, including the transmission company of Nigeria. And we said, even if this debt is your own debt that you have to be paid, there has to be permitted utilization. It's your money, you'll be given the money, but you must put it into permitted utilization. In other words, if a disco gets this money, it's not just going to use it to buy Jeep. It must use it to strengthen its distribution network. It must use it to acquire meters. It must use it for other such things. Generating companies themselves have to use it for permitted utilization. One organization I'm very happy with is the Kainji and Jeba hydropower plants. For 40 years, these plants were never serviced. There was need for capacity recovery. And through the NEMSF, contrary to my friend's statement, we had a capacity recovery of 1,377 megawatts. Generation capacity was recovered, which is why we're able to move from the 2005 or so, which was being generated, to somewhere about 5,000. Anybody can come around for empirical evidences which are in place. We had 787,282 meters purchased, 20% increase in meters, in metered customers as a result of that intervention. We have 575 transformers purchased and installed because of the NEMSF. We had 66 substations constructed and rehabilitated. And of course, because we want the market to transit to a contract-based market, we made sure that the discos placed the equivalent of 3 months power energy supply amount as LCs, and that came to 31.91 billion. We were able initially to position the market for the contract market, a base market to take off. And we said, let's cost reflective tariff now kick in. We didn't do that. And we relapsed. It's like you ask your patients to take a particular drug and get out of a situation. And you discharge him, now go home, do the right thing, and he didn't do it. And we relapsed back to where we are. Well, when this happened, we are still bankers to the federal government. And they passed, under the power sector recovery program, a target of 4,500 megawatt hour per hour has been fixed to be achieved for a period of 5 years. How do you achieve that if the generating companies do not have the comfort? And so the federal government had to come and then look for a facility. It is intended that within a period of 18 months, the deficiencies which we are seeing in the power sector will be fixed. And that facility was made available. Now, this facility had been running, and I am bold to say we were unable to reach the 701 billion limit, but somewhere along the line, we know that payments cannot continue. So the federal government now passed a resolution to borrow another 600 billion, which has not been disbursed. Let nobody tell you that the 600 billion has been disbursed. It has not been disbursed. Why has it not been disbursed? Because right now, there is the push that for any of that amount to be disbursed, there should be an accountability framework that should guide and monitor the remittances from the industry. The industry must sit up, which is why you are seeing some of the things that are happening now. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to say that as far as the central bank is concerned, our interventions are not moved by passion. They are moved by facts, figures, and definite outcomes that are expected. And we monitor these outcomes closely in order for us to intervene. And remember, intervention is short term. They are never forever. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, you make a, Elder Benebo, you make a very good point about the 20 to 30% premium on the cost of good if you look at it holistically from a GDP perspective. But you also talked about the 600 not being disbursed because there needs to be an accountability framework. So it begs the question, the first 2 times around, especially on the first instance, why wasn't that in place in terms of ensuring that as that was being disbursed, that there was basically you were getting value for money, and it wasn't a case of you sending your patient away and them not following instructions until that fund was exhausted?
Well, are you talking about the 701?
I'm talking about the 213.
No, for the 213 ab initio, it was intended to reset the power sector. And like I said, expectations were put across board. The expectations were met by all parties, but they reneged on those expectations. And one of the key expectations was to fix a cost-reflective tariff. That was done and it was withdrawn. Those in the industry know.
Sure.
It was done and it was withdrawn. And we relapsed into whatever we were now.
So we consistently we consistently talk about this question of a cost-reflective tariff. And I'm going to go over to Folake. It's something that Mr. Eugene Mohammed has talked about, which is the need to capitalize the discos. And I think he's also talking about not getting value for money in the first two, in the interventions we've had in the sector so far. So do you agree with the notion that the discos need to be capitalized, and what would the discos give in return, or how would the discos benefit, and how would that benefit the market overall?
First things first, let's start with like I said, you need to make sure that market forces apply. You cannot buy a product at 10 naira and sell it at 6 naira. It doesn't make any sense. When you're in a business, you buy a product at a cost, you allow for some margin that helps you to be able to invest in that business to enhance the product. Also, it's also important that you are bankable, that the banks are willing to invest in your capital expenditure or a potential new investor. Right now, even with the intervention, that is not happening. So it's important that the root cause issue is sorted out, which is, what does the market require? The market wants a product, they want the power.
Sure.
That's what the customer wants at the end of the day. The DISCO's responsibility is to ensure the customer gets that power at an affordable rate, or at least a commercially viable rate. And at this moment now, the DISCO is not able to do that because it's not following the market forces. And like I said, you can attract additional or new investments. Any intervention that comes in just takes care of that shortfall. That's the difference between 10 naira and 6 naira. You are not improving that market. And if you don't improve that market, you can't grow.
But who would you, in your view, and maybe the DISCO's view, who would you consider to be responsible for ensuring that we actually go to a market position?
So it's a regulated market. So who in the first place is not allowing us follow the market forces? I think we all know what that answer is. Do we have the political will to do what it takes? I like what Eugene said earlier on. The truth is that right now, you say that the people can't afford this power. People are actually paying that power. So the discos don't provide 24 hours in some areas. So if a disco is providing 6 hours in an area, and the customer is actually using, let's say, 18 hours, that is a mix of what is coming from the grid, from the disco, and the alternative. The alternative is not cheaper than what is coming from the grid. So when you do a blend, the consumer, the lowest person, and the person that can afford it, is already paying a cost-reflective tariff, technically. So why are we saying that the consumer, which is the reason, socioeconomic reasons, that they can't afford it? Let everybody pay for what they can afford. People will begin to conserve their energy. It's just like petrol.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Mr. Yuji, Falaka talks about the going to a position of a market forces. And of course, I asked the question about who's responsible for that. Of course, I'm sure she's alluding to NEC in this instance. Earlier you talked about regulatory consistency. I know a few years back the tariff was rolled back, and there have been questions about minor reviews, major reviews. In your view, how would you go about ensuring that we move to a position of where the market is actually functioning, so that we reduce these interventions by the federal government in the market, and also start to get value for monies being invested in the market as well?
Okay, thank you. First of all, as of today, Nigeria is binded by certain, is a signatory to certain protocols. Sure. One of these, the Nigeria is signatory to ECOWAS, for example. If you look at in 2018, December 22nd precisely, there was a meeting of ECOWAS Committee of Head of States, which Nigerian president was one that chaired that meeting. In that meeting, they approved the ECOWAS master plan, that is 2019 to 2033 Generation and Transmission Master Plan for West Africa. Together with that approval include 3 directives. These directives are: 1, all utilities, power utilities in West Africa should have their revenue requirement. And that means all of them should have their cost-reflective tariff. That's what it means. Secondly, countries that choose not to provide cost-reflective tariff, that is revenue requirement, should budget for the subsidy in a transparent manner. That is the directive. And the last but not the least among those directives is that utilities in West Africa must adapt competitive procurement of their goods and their services. That's how it is. So in that case, if Nigeria is a signatory to that protocol, then it's binding on Nigeria to provide cost-reflective tariff as of today. Now, secondly, as I said, this game will continue this game. Tomorrow, I mean, people cannot afford, they can afford. But, you know, I'm the chairman of West African Power Pool. I'm actually executive chairman of the West African Power Pool because I'm the chairman of the executive board. Now, I can tell you clearly, based on West Africans' experience, I can clearly say there's no relationship between poverty and payment of electricity. Because in 2012, when we did 2018, when we did a workshop here where we brought all the utilities in West Africa, 8 discos in Nigeria participated. Clearly, Nigerian discos happened to be the worst performing discos in West Africa. And what happened? What happened is that all discos that came, they came with their KPIs. And what is the KPI? What energy you receive and how much do you convert it to cash? And incidentally, the most efficient utility disco, I mean in West Africa at that time, was Sonabel. And Sonabel was sitting in the most poor country in West Africa, which is Burkina Faso.
Okay.
Burkina Faso. It's a landlocked country. They don't have non-mineral. They don't have anything like we have here. Now, at the same time, Burkina Faso have no energy resources. They don't have good source of generation and resources that we have here. And they buy electricity from Cote d'Ivoire, sometime at 17 cents per kilowatt hour. The highest generation we have in Nigeria, we are shouting, is Azura. Azura is about 10 point something cents per kilowatt hour. Abi? That's what we are dissing. And yet, Sonabel has 98% collection rate when we did our workshop. I took a decision to go to Sonabel to find out why is Sonabel efficient. Do you know what I discovered? What I discovered is that there is no house connected to the power in Sonabel that I see. And I went to Ouagadougou and some villages. There's no house that is not connected to, does not have meter. So what does that mean? It means that if we can provide electricity to our people, no matter how poor they are, that means if somebody's salary is about 30,000, for example, in a month, if you provide him electricity and you provide meter, and he consumes 20,000 in a month, that means next month he will learn how to on the light and off it in a way that he doesn't consume this kind of money. So what I say, provide the electricity for the people and give them the means of measurement and allow them to decide when they will on it and off it. And you will see that everything will work. That's how it happens in other places. Sure. But if we say, no cost-relative tariff, let's continue this business as usual, I can tell you before the end of this government, the intervention that our guys is doing, they are the bankers to the federal government, will reach 3 billion. The whole will reach 3 billion, I'm telling you. So it's either we take a decision or we continue to expand this intervention, and that means less money for hospital, less money for hospital universities, and less money for road. That's what it means. So I think we need to take a decision. That is the position. Now, when he was talking, he said that the intervention is also supporting TCN. I think I need to correct this position. The 700 billion, there's no one kobo for TCN inside. No, I'm coming, sir. There's no one kobo for 700 billion for TCN inside. The 600 billion they crafted, there's no one kobo for TCN. We're actually running TCN by innovation. And as of today, we are the most efficient utility among all the utilities because we run TCN in a way that is transparent. If you check, you will see that we are the only one that all our goods, all our procurement, we advertise it. We don't do it under the table. And that is reducing our cost significantly. That's what we are doing to survive. Now, the 213 billion, you gave us 15 billion, and you direct us to give Kano, Kaduna 5 billion, and give Abuja 6.5. So we didn't get anything. So don't say you are supporting us.
So essentially, the CBN gave with one hand and took away with the other hand.
So this is how it is. So what does that mean? Sir, you see, why we are doing what we have done is that we brought some level of innovation and this. We award contracts, we do like all discourse do. We decided to empower our staff to take responsibility that we give contractors. And that has significantly reduced our costs. Significantly, we reduced our costs through that. And we took a decision to do things differently. Competitive procurement. Let me tell you what happened. Abuja scheme that we did, 170 billion, that's the budget. We did the budget of Abuja scheme based on the tenders that we have done in the past. And when we did the competitive procurement and put transparency mechanism around, do you know that 170 billion, we have a saving of $25 million out of 170 because of the way we change the way we do business. So what we are saying is that we continue to play game, continue say payment assurance, poor cannot pay, and this. We continue this game. But I can tell you, as you said that the payment assurance have recovered some capacity in Kaenji and the rest of them. Of course, if they receive money, they can recover capacity. But if you recover capacity in Kaenji, you increase the capacity of transmission, and distribution cannot pick the load. What do? Nothing. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because electricity cannot be stored. And electricity is not something, you can only generate what you can demand. If your capacity is 100 megawatt, if your transmission capacity is 100 megawatt, and your distribution capacity is 10, you will only generate 10. That is what they call frequency management. The demand and the supply must balance anytime. You understand what I'm saying? So all these things that we're doing doesn't mean you can support generator, they expand their capacity, but the disco that refuse to collect the money, which was the cause of the reason we are intervening, is not expanding. It's not changing. All the network that they buy under transmission, under NEPA, is still there. And let me also tell you, sir, all the people that are running the discos, as at now, the key people, I'm not talking the political or gas, the real people that are doing the work, are our former colleagues in NEPA. You know, I'm a former NEPA staff. Our colleagues in NEPA, they are the people running the place, and they have bankers and big organs on top of them. So if you have a privatization that didn't bring foreign technical know-how, did not bring capital, did not bring anything, the same people who are running the organization are running it. Now, what kind of privatization is this?
So the question is, I mean, you took away the first, which I was going to ask, was whether any of the government, whether TCN is concerned that none of the government interventions have come its way. But you've alluded to the potential role of the discos, which is at the collection end of things. So if these government interventions were to be directed specifically to what will start to solve, because I'm not going to claim that it will solve it, would, for example, metering, which is that measurement, you know, you talked about poverty having nothing to do with ability to pay. So if the government intervention were specifically targeted towards metering, for example, do you think that would make a difference in the sector?
Rumundaka is here. He is the pioneer market operator. So he understands the market very well. The fact is that what is the basis of the privatization? You have a performance contract that is signed between the discos and the government, which BP is the custodian. Sure. Now, what is the performance contract? Performance contract means that the discos will bring resources to reduce the losses in the system for a period of 5 years. How do you reduce the losses? The losses include technical loss and commercial loss. The technical loss are those ones that you need to change the wire and the transformers, isn't it? Sure. Now, the commercial loss is the meters that you need to meter the place and make measure all the collection that you are doing. So, see, what I told people, even this map that they have done now, is not going to work. Because as of today, I don't see motivation on the side of the discourse to provide meter. Because it's easier for me to put 200, this is a feeder. In a month, I'm supposed to put 100 million worth of electricity. But I can put 20 million worth of electricity and charge the people 100 million through fixed estimated billing. Why should I allow them to have meter? So, look, why is this meter not in the shop like in market that we buy? Why is it not? It's not there. People are ready to pay, but you never see. Fair enough. Because there's no motivation. So we need to capitalize this company, bring companies, people with experience, and let me also tell you, we did a work with our money. Because it's in our interest for the discourse to perform. As of today, all the interface issues that were existing when they privatized is still existing. Out of the 738 interface we have with the discourse, only 421 has protection on the side of the discos. The remaining one they don't have adequate protection, meaning fault on 4 and 5 line in people's house for this 317, for the 317 interfaces. Fault on people's house will hit our transformer directly.
So let me turn to
so if we don't capitalize the discourse and provide protection on that side, even the investment we're doing on the side of TCI is not sustainable.
So
there's no way.
Thank you very much. Let me turn to Folake for a second. You've heard what our colleague has said in terms of the motivation of the discos, and you hear this on the street all the time about discos preferring to go the way of estimated billing. You hear it in, whether it's in the pepper soup parlor or even in the corporate offices. That's a consistent theme. What are your views on that? And is there a way to change that mindset? I mean, I know one of the challenges that discos technically have is this issue of financing. So how do you bridge that, and how do you move past that to ensure that you start to make sure that your customers are paying?
Okay, I need to first correct an impression that UG shared with the audience here. The disco has no basis of preferring estimation. And I'll just break it down for us simply. And I go back to something that I've been saying consistently. Remember, if I get 10 megawatts, for example, of energy at 10 naira, I'm selling it at 6 naira. I'm already in negative position, first of all. So technically, all the discos are in a negative position. Let's first start with that. Okay. Secondly, when you have metering at the, first of all, let's say the transmission point, the DT, the transformer, okay, it tells you the amount of energy that has gone into that transformer, which means that that energy was consumed. So if, for example, 10 was consumed on a DT transformer, the customers on that transformer have consumed that energy. Now, the responsibility of the DISCO is to ensure that they know the customers that are on that transformer. They ensure the customers are metered. But as it is now, because of the liquidity issues, the DISCOs are not able to meter as quickly as they want to. Hence the reason you introduce the map. Now, the maps, what is the DISCO losing? The DISCO is supporting the map. But why is the map itself struggling? Even to meter. I will tell us why. So, remember that we're regulated. The price of the meters have also been capped by the regulator, which is fine. Single phase, 3-phase meters. The maps you brought in, who have also looked for investors to support them to bring meters to customers, are having issues because they placed orders and without notice, the import on the duty for those meters that they brought in was increased from 10% to 45% without notice. Where are they supposed to pass on that cost to? So guess what? It's not the DISCOs that is not metering now. We have a meter asset provider who is unable to bring the meters there. Now, if I know that 10 megawatt was in a transformer, and I know that people are stealing my energy, and we have a methodology for counting the energy. You know, you do load assessment and all for individuals, and you give a customer a bill, and the customer refuses to pay. It's not because the DISO wants to estimate that customer. It is easier for me to put a meter there, and the customer pays even up front, than for me to give an estimate. The customer is angry, the customer is fighting and harassing my staff, and paying money to people to go and constantly go and disconnect. That doesn't make sense. It's not costing me money. Is it not easier for me to have a meter there and the customer is paying for what he consumes and are getting cash? It's cleaner. Why should the DISCO prefer estimation? It doesn't make any sense.
So how do you let me?
So I'm saying this because people really feel that DISCOs prefer estimation. It's harder. If there's a meter there, it's paid. Customers pay in advance and they use what they consume. That's cleaner and neater.
So the question is, outside of the map currently, and this might be a difficult question, but outside of the map currently, how easy is it to acquire a meter? Because a number of times we get calls, people you know outside the sector will call and say, look, I'm trying to get a meter. I'm in either Abuja Disco, I'm in Ikeja Electric, under Ikeja Electric. we've applied for a meter, I have my receipts, but nobody has, in the past 3, 5, 1 year, has provided us with a meter, and so they get tired. So what's that? It's not necessarily a magic bullet, but what's the process for getting a meter outside the map, if there are solutions to
So
that?
based on the regulation now, the only way we meter is through the map. The discos are not metering directly anymore. That is the new regulation. But that's why I took my time to explain that even with the map, there are constraints that the maps even are experiencing because you import this meter. So let me start from, if you order a meter today from a manufacturer, it takes 3 months to get into Nigeria. If your meter gets into Nigeria and you can't even clear it at the port because of the expense, how is the meter manufacturer or the meter asset provider supposed to get funds to clear that meter when he cannot recover the cost of that meter from the price? Because that price is regulated.
Sure.
So guess what? The meter is 38 naira, 38,000 naira, and the landing cost of that meter for a meter asset provider is 45 naira, 45,000 naira. How is it going to break even? It's the same thing that has applied with us with regards to the tariff. So there's a problem that we need to really
Sure.
solve here. We cannot continue to, I insist on this, we cannot continue to say we regulate something without looking at the market forces and market reality. If something costs 10 naira, then it costs 10 naira. You can't ask me to pay 6 naira for something that costs 10 naira. It just doesn't make sense.
Okay. Let me welcome Mr. Chiedu Ubo, the MD of NDPHC, who has just returned from the National Assembly, from what we understand. Please give him a round of applause. And while he's settling in, let me call him a non-direct stakeholder, and that's Elder Boma, in terms of, do you think that, given the challenges that the different stakeholders have had, that the government should, well, given the different challenges that have been had in the sector, do you think that we should rethink how we, well, first of all, rethink how we approach these problems, and whether the government should declare a state of emergency in the sector and prioritize it? Because this issue about duties being 10% and then raising it to 45% in the middle of a transaction, or an instance where, say, in the renewable segment, where Ministry of Finance has indicated that there is a duty-free importation of solar panels, but custom insists on collecting, shows that there's a non-alignment among government agencies. So do you think there should be a state of emergency in the sector? And what are the other approaches we could take to making things go?
Well, the first thing I would like to advise the sector is to stop this blame game amongst themselves. The power sector must come together and know that what affects one affects all. If today the distribution sector is the weakest link, others should sit up and say, how do we fix that weak link? Because if you generate power, it gets to transmission, gets to the distribution points, and they can't collect that money back, you are going to lose too. So my advice is that, much as there is no magic wand, there should be a collective review of the value chain, and then we should make sure we institute transparency and accountability framework. We are all part of this society. We are all part of the system. We know those who are bypassing. Every bypass hurts every other person. If you like, blame the discos. If you like, take their licenses. Some other person come, and that same attitude and actions prevail, you get the same results. So let's fix the problems from the roots. And that is something everybody has to think about collectively. If we say that we cannot get meters to meter everybody, is there no other solution? The DISCO had just mentioned, for example, that for every power that enters a particular community, there is a transformer. And that transformer records the amount of power that goes into that community. Can we not solve that through policy, franchising. Somebody is held accountable for the power that enters that community, buys the power that enters that community, and ensures that that community pays for the power that enters that community. It will break it down.
Okay.
And then we go on to phased metering. We are hearing all the problems of importation of meters. Let's sit around the table and resolve these issues.
Sure.
Blame game will not take us anywhere.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Before, because we're at the point where we'll go to audience Q&A, but before that, I'd like to give Mr. Ogbo a chance. And my question to you are twofold. One is, how would you rate the federal government's almost 1.5 trillion naira intervention in the sector? And a lot of our conversations have centered on regulatory consistency. So my other question would be, in what ways can the regulator make your work at NDPHC and the sector as a whole easier in terms of moving the sector forward?
Okay. Is this on? Okay. Good evening, everyone, and my sincere apologies for coming in late. When you have many masters, it's what you face. The intervention. I'm sure I'm the only one from generation here, so I would look at it from a different perspective. The interventions, particularly the 701 and now the 600 billion, have contributed immensely to ensuring that we still have electricity, be it at 4,000 megawatts or even at 3,800, whatever level you want to call it. If you did not provide interventions, if government and the central bank were not very responsive to come in with intervention, no generation company would have been alive today, clearly. The remittances, I'm sure you've spoken about it, average of 25%. My gas cost is well above 65% in a month invoice. So if you pay me 25%, I'm not going to ever meet my gas cost. The gas suppliers, they're not going to continue to supply you on credit. In fact, they will shut you down when it gets, some of them, when the debt gets to 1 billion naira, they shut you off. And it's so easy to get to 1 billion naira. So with intervention, we've been able to remain afloat. We've been able to at least continue to pay our gas suppliers. Whether it is sustainable is a different question. And I think the government and all the stakeholders are addressing that issue of sustainability now. But for us, our generation, it has helped to keep us because the market, the liquidity challenge, the revenue shortage in the market is real and it's affecting everyone. It comes from downstream and it flows back to us, even when our electricity has flowed that way. So it has helped. We all know that it's not sustainable, and the government is working, doing its best to ensure that the market resets. I'm not holding brief for government. I'm sure some government stakeholders would, maybe Beneba will be in a position to explain that or to say that. But suffice it to say that, again, what Beneba talked about, to stop the blame game and all that, I think within the government circle, that's also being addressed. Recently, like 2 days ago, even the the Senate Committee on Power gathered every stakeholder, and action is ongoing. We are just coming from one of the meetings. I was there with UGD, a smaller group with UG Mohammed this evening. So government is addressing that. It's an issue. We're trying to remove the blame game. We're trying to, or government rather, is trying to also remove the issue of misalignment by the various parties. Let us all work together and resolve the challenge. So there's a renewed focus in resolving the challenge in the sector. The second question,
Around regulatory consistency.
yes, regulatory consistency. Well, we've also seen that how that has derailed the sector. However you look at it, I mean, the 2015 removal of
Fixed charge.
Yes, and even the collection losses and all that. That's where the major problem started, and it has to do with regulatory inconsistency. We've seen that it didn't help us. I've also said that it's not just having regulatory commission; it's about the quality and the certainty of regulation that works. I mean, the whole idea, one of the attributes of a good regulator is that you must make rules that are predictable. They are quasi-judicial. So the same way we have rules of court, because we want to know that if you take this step, you arrive at a particular outcome. That is how the regulators should also act. Unfortunately, we've had that over time, and there's no gainsaying that the fact that it is one of the important, very critical factors for the survival of the sector to have regulatory certainty. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And at this point, let's give them a round of applause, please. At this point, we'd like to keep to our agenda and go to the audience for questions. I already see a question. Okay, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So the gentleman on the cap over there. And when you introduce yourself say where you're from, and keep your questions very succinct.
Okay. Thank you. My name is Mati Jamil. I'm a corporate services consultant. My question is to Mr. Boma. And you had asked this question earlier. So I've been to Kura, Ajingi, Hadeja, and Ringim in the last 2 days. So I've seen a lot of Nigerians struggling to make ends meet, breaking their backs every day. So you said something about accountability framework for the intervention fund. And you made mention that initially, for the first two, the framework was not set in place. That you have ensured that the third one will be properly enforced. Why was this not properly done? Because we cannot continue to support people that will continue to sink monies in holes. Because there are people in need of money in Nigeria. There are people that are doing. I met a young man, James Marlowe. He does tractors. He produced tractors. And he doesn't even have money to fund things like that. So if you're giving these discos a lot of money, and you, even the regulator, you're unable to account for it, what then is the hope of the common man?
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm Engineer Ismail Arafiu. My question will go to UG Mohammed. And there are two questions. You mentioned about going to Burkina Faso. And being the poorest country you can think of, you are surprised at the level of commitment of the poor people to pay for the meter. And what they are consuming from Cote d'Ivoire is really very small, but they are paying. So why do you think you must invest first before you implement cost-reflective tariff? Because it seems to me like once you can put that cost-reflective tariff in place, you remove the big elephant in the room. These people will not be able to complain about not making enough return on all those things. That should be the first thing to do, to create the enabling environment for the for the electricity to be sellable. So your conclusion from Burkina Faso and your stance are not sitting well together, because you are saying that government should bring in money first before. No, I think you are reversing the way it should go. Then the second question to you is, you didn't really discuss your organization. That's the TCN. Because we've been hearing that you are actually in the middle, but your capacity cannot really carry everything that is being produced by the gentleman on the far side and his people. You can't carry everything that they are producing. Yet, you've not tell us your growth plan, your challenges, and how you are trying to see that whatever is produced, you are able to will it away. At least if you will it away, then we know that we are having the discourse now to deal with.
All right,
then we can talk about meters. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Romondaka Wanode, and my question is from observations. So The Benebo, you talked about accountability framework. So just hold that. Eugene Mohammed, you talked about going to Burkina Faso and finding out that people with meters um, all were compliant in paying and they were happy with it. And you talked about the issue of you would rather meter people rather than estimated billing. So, but first is that we understand that people who are metered also bypass the meter. So it's not an assurance for revenue, right? And then secondly, in this issue of accountability and framework, what is the accountability towards the consumer, right? Because, we talk about cost reflective tariff, and I'll say this everywhere I go, that there is no predictability in service. And when people talk about that people could use their generator, they tend to underestimate predictability, reliability premium, which is that I call on my generator and it gives me power when I need it. And when it comes to the grid power, there's no certainty when it's going to show. And therefore, even if the cost is reflective, it's meaningless to people. So in all these discussions, how, going forward as you look to solve this problem, Mr. Ubo, are you taking into how to deliver predictable power to the consumer so that at least we sit at home, we know when we can expect the little power, 2 hours or 4 hours.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Vincent Guenot. I'm the chairman of Reservoir Capital. It's a Canadian listed company, and we have invested in 2 power generation companies in Nigeria, the 2 hydro gencos. I agree with you, sir, that finger pointing is not the best way. However, we don't have many other ways to make people improve. So please allow me to point fingers tonight. As a foreign investor, we are very frustrated because we paid tens of millions of nairas to CBN to get CCIs, Certificate of Capital Importation, and we are denied the official rate on the dollars when we are lucky enough to have a trickle of tiny dividends. So you are dishonoring the commitment. You have sold us a certificate, which we paid cash, and you are denying us the service. So this is fraud. TCN, you have the obligation to prioritize the cheapest kilowatt hours. The cheapest kilowatt hours on this grid is from the hydropower stations. But in Kainji and Jeba, they have every month and every day 300 to 500 megawatts stranded that you are not willing because you are prioritizing the NDPHC power stations, Azura and others, which are selling at 2-3 times the price of the hydropower stations. And then, of course, it creates a cost problem to the discos as well. Then the discos, sorry, but you have not honored your commitment from the prioritization. You were supposed to raise funding to pay your license and to fund your investments. You have only funded one, and you have not done the other. You have just breached your own contract. And because you breached, it cascaded, and but breached, everybody breached.
Right.
But the original source breach, sorry to say, it's yours. Now we are ready to help you, but you have to acknowledge your responsibility.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. I will have the panelists respond to these questions, and then we'll go back to the others. Let me start with Elder Benibo. There were 2 questions, overlapping questions on the accountability framework you talked about. So I think I would have you focus on that.
Yeah.
And then I think Ismaila had a question for Yuji on the 2 questions really touched on the Burkina experience and then the notion of what TCN is doing. But I'm not sure if you want Yuji to start on what TCN is doing. We're not going to leave here today. But let me start with Elder Benibo, and then I'll come to Yuji. The accountability framework.
Thank you very much for asking me to throw more light on the accountability framework. It's semantics. accountability framework. For every intervention of the central bank, there is always a framework with which we judge that particular intervention. And for any MSF, I rolled out the framework for the accountability and the outcomes when we reviewed the performance of this particular intervention. For the 701 billion, one of the major intention was set by the Power Sector Recovery Program, of which the World Bank was part of. And they said they want a situation where we can guarantee as a nation 4,500 megawatt hour per hour for the next 5 years. So how do you get that out? That was the primary focus for intervening with the 701. Now, it was left to the regulator to be able to, within the period of 18 to 24 months, resolve the collection issues that were plaguing the system, such that by the 24th month, they should have been able to reduce the increased remittances that is coming back from the power generated, so that there will be no need for intervention again. I will have said perhaps the regulator should be sitting here. I'm regulator for the banking sector, but I am financier to the federal government and also advisor. So it is in those two capacities of financier and advisor I sit here. But when I tell you about accountability framework coming out for the 600 billion, I am only telling you what the regulator has vowed to do to make sure that if the first phase, where the 701 was rolled out, to ensure the country maintains at least a power level of 4,500 megawatts hour per hour is done continuously, there should be something done about what was not done initially. That is why you hear this word resounding again, accountability framework.
Thank you.
There has always been an accountability framework. Just ask the framework for each of the interventions and you'll get it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to come to you, Eugene, in terms of, and I'm going to tie Ismaila's questions with that of Rumun Daka and Vincent as well. Rumu asked the question about two main points. One, predictability of power and the accountability towards the customers, because I sense a tension in the regulator trying to, on some sense, getting the cheapest power for the for customers by maybe trying to keep the tariff down. But at the same time, as Folake would propose, which is that we need to get to a market framework, so you can't keep prices artificially down. So how do you work on the issue of power predictability as well as accountability towards customers in terms of what they're getting in power and what they're paying?
So you don't want me to answer the question of what are we doing on the side of TCN?
You can talk. You can certainly touch on that.
Anyway, Ismaila, if you want to know about what we are doing, actually, Ms. Mba, we have it's on our website, isn't it? On our website, you can check. When we came in 2017, we did a 20-year least cost transmission expansion plan, which was done by Mrs. Fichtner. I'm sure you've heard of Fichtner. It's a very big consultancy company based in Germany. Now, on the basis of that 20-year least cost transmission expansion plan, we came up with what we call Transmission Rehabilitation and Expansion Program, which is a 4-year out of the 20-year least cost transmission expansion plan. Now, it is this Transmission Rehabilitation and Expansion Plan that is 4-year that we are implementing. And as at October, we have installed 68 power transformers across the country. This has never happened in the history of Nigeria. And we did this by empowering TCN engineers to take responsibility that they don't do before. So that is what we have done. And if you also want to know whether we have worked, also go and download the report of Ikeja Disco. ICO and Ikeja Disco. ICO came out with a report and confirmed the capacity that transmission have now. And they said between 2019 and 2024 that they expect that they are going to have constraint in only 3 places. Between 2019 and 2024, they are going to have constraint in only 3 places. And those 3 places they think that they are going to have constraint are Isolo, Abara, and Lekki. We called them for a meeting and we resolved all those problems that they said they have. We resolved it immediately. Now, we also saw Ikeja Disco posted a report. They never told us, they didn't send the report to us. But we saw the report they posted and we called them for a meeting yesterday. And they said between 2019 and 2024, they are going to have constraint in 5 places. But currently, they already have a constraint in 1 place. Now, when we held the meeting with them, we told them, give us that 1 place where you have the constraint. And they said it's in Ikorodu. We discovered that the capacity we have in Ikorodu, they don't even take 50%. So we told them, go back and research and do your mathematics properly. And we direct our regional office in Lagos to work with them so that they come again with a credible report that shows where the constraint is, and we will solve it. Now, TCN doesn't work the way we used to work before. You understand what I'm saying? So we are implementing transmission rehabilitation and expansion program. And as of today, we have attracted $1.661 billion. And we are doing other interventions that we don't do before, like connecting Eco Atlantic and providing N-1 across the country. I'm sure you don't hear this before, but we are putting N-1 across the country. What does that mean? It means any equipment that goes out should not affect the supply of that place. That means give us time to fix it. That's what it means. Now, on the issue of Burkina Faso, I gave you a scenario of what happened exactly. Now, of course, you can do the formula, you increase tariff, and tariff will come in, and then they will raise the money through the tariff, bankers will give them money. But let me also tell you, one of the biggest problems we have with the power sector reform is actually Nigerian banks. What you didn't know is that, I didn't have time to give you what went wrong. But let me give you a little of what went wrong. When we reduce the qualification criteria, the big companies that have experience in running this course have not come. Tata, EDF, all those big companies, none of them came. Now, when we did roadshow, we know that they will not come. We know it. So when we know they will not come, we decide to reduce the qualification criteria. When we reduce the qualification criteria, UG Mohammed and Co. took over the discourse, backed by experienced company and under the name of, technical partnership. Do you understand? Don't forget also, I was the secretary of RCM. The first intervention that brought private sector in the power sector in 2001 when Imoki was the chairman, I was the secretary. At that time, we did not allow technical partnership. Even when that one, they are just consultants. They are not even owning assets, but we allow it. Now, when we distributed to our companies, nobody will come. So Nigerian bank rushed to them and gave them money to pay for the assets. Now, these are money that are short-term and money that are very expensive, not ideal for financing this kind of infrastructure. And that is why we started having liquidity crisis from the beginning. Did you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So now it's either you play grammar and said, what we are saying now is that ideal money that's supposed to finance this kind of work should take place. And we have done study. If you want, we can share the study with you. And we have also got some other experience areas, like we work with the African Development Bank, we work with McKinsey to benchmark, and that's why we come up with that 4.3 billion investment requirement of the discos. But again, check the report of Ikeja Disco and Eco Disco. You will see that what we put as the investment requirement is not contradictory to what they wrote now in their own as the investment requirement. So this is what I want to tell you. Now, let me complete this issue of obligation. There was this issue of obligation to sell electricity to the cheapest. I think you are referring to the.
That's Vincent's question.
What do they call it? Dispatch. The dispatch. You are referring to the dispatch. The dispatch is also approved by the regulator. It's not only the issue of ISO. And for information, you say the cheapest disco, the deepest generator is Kaenji and Jeba. I don't think you're right. We have generators that are cheaper than Kaenji and Jeba. Ajip and Shell, they are cheaper than Kaenji and Jeba. So don't say they are the only ones that are cheap. But the point is that it's approved by the regulator. And regulator has introduced some other criteria also. Effective contract is also part of the dispatch criteria. But now, if you have this kind of scenario where you have a generation capacity of about 7,500 and you have a capacity of what you can distribute is 3,000, definitely you're going to have problem. In reality, in many cases, there are several cases where I was forced to remove those dispatchers and bring another people. And so many times, if you look recently, I advertised for the complete audit of the market of the system operation and the market operator, which is consistent with the market, just because we want to provide some level of transparency in the way we do the dispatch.
Okay.
But if we don't do something to expand the network of the distribution, we will continue to dance here and provide money that will add nothing. Then the next 3 years will come and we'll see it be 4,000. That's what
Okay, thank you. Ismaila, as you see, the TCM masterclass will continue downstairs after this. Sure. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Just to quickly, I think one from Rumo and one from
Vincent
from Kaenji. The one from Rumo, predictability of power. Even right now, I have my power plants substantially commercially available. So the turbines are made to run. They are not meant to sit idle. So the overarching issue still remains money. If money flows, I will be able to pay for gas and I will be able to provide power. Disco, well, at disco level, I thought you asked me about, okay, at disco level, she will answer that. Then, prioritizing, I don't know where Vincent got his figures from because that's part of one issue that I've been hammering on and, only recently I'm having just a little handshake, not even much, with UG with respect to that. We know the merit order dispatch was set by the regulator and I've been pushing the one you are talking. If you check Azura, Azura is not fully dispatched. Not to talk of my Calabar. Calabar is 625 megawatts installed. What am I doing today? If I do up to 300 today, I've tried. You do a lot more than me every day. I check it. So it's not, we are not being prioritized, but government has huge exposure there. We're all working to see how the consumers for whose benefits these power plants were built will get the benefits. And that is resolving the problem in the sector. We are not where we should be, but we're all working towards that. Okay. But please, I don't want the misinformation that we are being prioritized because that's where we are pushing. Okay. That's where we are pushing for. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to our next round of 4 questions. Let's make our way from the back. I see the gentleman in the blue outfits and the cap with his hands raised. Yes, that, and then we'll come forward. 4 questions. Are there no women in the audience to ask questions?
Sorry? Oh, okay. Good evening. My name is Mashud Yusuf. I'm a private legal practitioner here in Abuja. Mine is an observation. There's kind of insincerity from the policymakers. Unfortunately, there's nobody from the Ministry of Power. We talk about improving liquidity in the NACI. Ministries, departments, and agencies of government do not pay for electricity. They consume. Billions are piling up in debts, and these agencies don't pay, and yet nothing is done, and we want to improve liquidity. We sincerely need to have a rethink. The Power Sector Recovery Program was done by World Bank. That program has not been, it has its condition precedents for the policymakers and everybody in the power sector. And the reason why that document is still where it is today is because the policymakers are not willing to sign and ensure that their own condition precedents are met. So when we talk about a solution to the problems in the power sector, we shouldn't talk about ad hoc solutions. We should talk about permanent solutions. And to solve the liquidity problem, government must demonstrate a good example by ensuring that they pay their bills as at when due. The ministries, department, and agencies. There was a policy for deduction at source, which has not been implemented for over 4 years. Government agreed to deduct at source and pay these companies because electricity is not a free product.
Thank you. Yes. No, yeah.
Good evening. My name is Engineer Edward Adiku. I've got a couple of questions. First for...
One question, if you don't mind.
Okay. The first question is on financing. That's for the CBN director. The second is for the head of transmission. The third is for the discount.
One question.
Okay. Okay.
What's the most important question to you?
I'll try and be as quick with all the questions. Why do we want to keep subsidizing power? That's the summary of the questions. Because the CBN has gone through 3 intervention funds, and all that is centered on subsidizing power for the poor, just as we are subsidizing several other sectors in energy, petrol, for example. Why do we want to keep subsidizing power? We've all talked about the reason why, which is, with issues on tariff and, the government not being, agreeing to meet up with the tariffs and all that. So why, to the CBN guy, why do we want to keep subsidizing power? 2, to the TCN guy, why, what is the current capacity?
Let him finish that question.
We want to know what your current capacity is, because since this policy reform was implemented, we've been hovering between 2,000-3,000 megawatts to say 5,000 megawatts.
Okay.
And like Ismail said, my colleague engineer Ismail said, we want to know what exactly your current capacity is. You've mentioned that you've done some investments. What is your capacity, and where do you intend to get to in the next 4 years?
All right, thank you. Next question in front here.
Okay. My name is Solomon Makinde. I work for NNPC. Actually, want to say that the interventions that took place, the 213, 701, all did meet their objectives. The problem is the objectives that were set for them. And the objectives that were set for them were not set to solve the problem. So my question is, assuming we could go back a couple of years and we still had the 1 billion naira, what would you have? The question is to Ms. Shoeton, I think. What would you have think that we should have done with the money? Let's agree that because the regulator is not here, the policymakers are not here. What should we have done with the money that would have made it possible for us to have progressed? Because from the objectives that were set for those monies were not to make us progress. But today, I like what in the 213, if the research that was done would have made us progress, if NEC had implemented the cost-reflective tariff that was agreed to have been implemented. But assuming we could have gone back a couple of years, where do you think we should have put the money that would have made us progress?
All right, thank you. And the last question for this round over here.
Okay, good evening. My name is Ridwan. I'm a grad student. So my question goes to Madam Folakemi from Ikeja Electric. So my question is, okay, I used to stay in Lagos before I moved down here, and I realized that I stayed in Maryland, and they were giving us estimated billing every other time, in Monday precisely, and I know that they used to give us light for longer periods of time. So they said, okay, they were going to give us meter at some point that we should pay. So today you were now talking about the meter is 30,000 naira. You told us initially, okay, let's assume that I paid 30,000 naira. And you said the cost of landing the meter plus the duty, custom duty and all, ended up being 45,000 naira. So what would you do? Are you telling us that you come back to us and tell us that, okay, the price has now increased, and how do you intend to do that? Would you continue to charge us the estimated billing that keeps growing, as in, is always skyrocketing every other time? So what are you going to do to solve that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to have the panelists answer this round of questions. And I'll let Folake start out, if you don't mind, because the last two questions seem to have been directed at you, one from Solomon Makinde and the last one from Real One. I think Solomon's question basically is saying, if you were to go back to the time of the 213, what objective would you have set at that time? Or the 701? What objectives would you have set at that time rather than the one that was there? And then I think Real One's question around the pricing of meters.
I think you actually answered your question, but I'll reiterate it. There was an objective set. It was the money was to cover a gap, a shortfall. And that shortfall, when the Genco was speaking, covered an obligation that the DISCO, who is the one that is collecting on behalf of the value chain, had. If the DISCO is not able to pay the embed, which ultimately translates to the Genco, they cannot continue to provide that service. So that bailout or that intervention in code helped do that. But then what was the next thing that was supposed to happen? So I think that the objective or what that intervention was supposed to cover was resolved. But what then happened afterwards? What were we supposed to do? So there's a shortfall. How do we avoid having a shortfall again? Because then if you don't have a shortfall, you don't need an intervention. Do you get my point? So the real issue is not necessarily about root cause. What do I do to prevent a shortfall? Which is what he alluded to, that we had different objectives set, we didn't follow through. So if we're to do it again today, first of all, I keep reiterating, market realities are market realities. Ensure, if you insist that because of social economic factors, as a government, you want to protect the citizens, then protect the citizens and pay that shortfall and don't pass it on to the market. If you can't afford that, which is obvious, it's not sustainable, then let the market forces apply. So what do? Set the rules for everyone. DISCO, these are your targets, these are your obligations. The other man said that the DISCO could not meet his obligations. You can't meet your obligations. There's no way, you're already dead on arrival. How do you want to meet your obligations? Somebody spoke about predictability. How is the DISCO supposed to ensure that the customers continue to get the product? So they want to have 10 hours. How can a DISCO commit to the consumer that you will consistently get 10 hours? If, for example, I don't even have the liquidity to maintain, I'm not even talking about introducing new equipment now, to maintain the current facility. There's no way I can predict that. So I'm firefighting all the time. Going to your question about the metering, like I said, because the DISCO had a liquidity issue, the regulator came with an intervention, an initiative, saying let's give it to a third party who will come in as a meter asset provider. So it's not the DISCOs now, it's a third party. Now the reason I share that example is that now you've taken it out of the DISCO. The DISCO has said, I don't have the liquidity to provide the meters. Let me give it to a third party to raise funds, right? It should be commercially viable. And you've also capped the price of the meter. Now I'm telling you, from a DISCO perspective, what I know is happening even to that meter asset provider, he cannot deliver that product because he's also dead on arrival. So same thing applies. If I go back to it, what is root cause? If the cost from A to Z is 45,000 naira, let that be the cost. That's what the cost is. Don't say that because you want to make it affordable, then you make the person that is doing the investment be in a dark position. They will not attract new investment. The banks will not touch them. Same thing has happened with him. I just use that example to show you that if you continue to do this, this is the result you get, unless you have another solution.
All right, thank you very much. I'll ask Yuji to answer the initial question on, I guess he touched on policymakers. What was that?
Yeah.
Well, there was the capacity of TCN, but also the question about policymakers as well. So if you can tackle those two questions.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to tell you on good authority that in 2017, transmission was the weakest in the power value chain. I remember the first meeting we did in Ibadan in 2017, that was in February 2017. All the discussion was around transmission. Yesterday, 2 days ago, when we had a meeting in front of Senate, I can remember Madam was in that meeting. I didn't say transmission have solved all this problem, but clearly transmission was not the problem at that discussion. Now, what did we do? What we did was to use different method of work. And as I told you, I don't want you to use my document now. Go and download the operational capacity that Ikeja Disco claimed TCN have, and the operational capacity that EcoDisco said TCN have. You are going to see that the combined capacity of those two companies, that is operational capacity, not what we have that is not operational, is about 3,700. So if we have all 3,700 in Lagos, are we saying the whole of Nigeria is remaining 1,000 or 300? So what I'm trying to say is that the last simulation that we did, which was 2018, was the capacity of TCN was 8,100. But as I told you, I cannot say that there are certain areas that we don't have constraint, even as of today. But those areas where we have constraint, and that's why we are implementing the transmission rehabilitation and expansion program, which as of today, we have $1.661 billion. It has phase two. The phase two is estimated to be about $900 million. And that one, we're even starting it early next year. We're going to start that one. And that one will solve some other constraints that will provide redundancy for supply of key areas like Port Harcourt, like the Northeast, like providing redundancy for Opai. Opai doesn't have redundancy, so that will provide redundancy. And provide redundancy for Dupani also, which is owned by NDPC. So that's what we are doing. So you can go and download Ikeja and Disco's report, and you can ascertain and make up your mind whether what we are saying is right or not. Now, the next question that I need to answer is the issue of MDA debt. It's also another problem with government, to be honest. Because when the performance contract was signed, the aggregate technical commercial loss in those discos include government debts and private debt and everybody's debts. I remembered when I was in PSCN before I moved to African Development Bank, I used to be the manager revenue of Abuja. I remember that I've disconnected National Assembly many times. More than 5 times I've disconnected National Assembly. I've also disconnected some of those barracks that we're seeing. So when somebody sit down and say he will not disconnect all those people, places, it baffles me. And as the MD I've guaranteed, if MD of Abuja Disco is here, he will tell you, I have guaranteed Ministry of Finance 3 times they want to disconnect them. I put the guarantee that they are going to pay for so number of days before they left them. So what am I trying to say? In 2017, I was in the power sector when all the MDS were asked to submit, all the discos were asked to submit their debts that the MDS are owing them. They submitted to Damilola of REA. That time she was in the vice president office. When they did assessment and they did the checking of the debts, what did they discover? More than 50% of those debts are fictitious. So what we need as a government actually is a policy, government to issue policy directive. All MDS should pay their debt. Anybody who doesn't pay, the disco should disconnect them. But this arrangement of that government will take responsibility or NAG will take responsibility, first of all, is violating the performance contract that was signed with the discos. At the same time, the discos are estimating those MDS and giving fictitious debt. So I think we have to get out of that mode. That is a fact. Now, the next thing that I need to talk about is the issue of
PSRP.
Power Sector Recovery Plan. Many people think that solution of Nigerian problem is with some people who come with magic somewhere. There's no magic anywhere that will bring. And let me also tell you, what we implemented in Nigeria has no model all over the world. So if you are thinking that there's somebody who will bring one model somewhere that will solve our problem, you are just deceiving yourself. Let me give you an example. This single buyer model that we have implemented in Nigeria now, where government will guarantee generators and the disco will handshake and then there will be government in the middle and they will guarantee everything. That's what they call single buyer model. There's a report by the World Bank in 2000. You can Google it. Take your computer, Google it. Put the problematic single buyer electricity model. You will see it. You will see that report. That report was in 2000. And that report shows that all countries that implemented the single buyer model has not worked. So why did they advise us to implement it here? It's because we are a laboratory. So let's try it here, maybe it will work also. That's why they did it. So let me tell you, part of the reason why some of us kick against the power sector recovery plan, which is being corrected now, and I wrote a letter against it, is because we believe that if we implement that, it will not work. And one of the things that make it will not work has just been clearly shown by what NAC has done recently, by issuing the suspension of 8 discos. Suspending 8 discos is an anarchy. How can you kill 8 discos? If you implement a law that more than 50% of the people will default to that law, do you think that law is a reasonable law? So you have to do something to correct that. And that's what we are saying, that discos have to be capitalized. Capitalization means that if you own 10%, you have 50, 60%, you end up having 5%. And we have done check. If we do regulatory consistency, we provide cost-reflective tariff, we reset the books of the discos, because inside these books of the discos, there's some amount that cannot be collected. For example, Rumunaka, the Gencos are charging 305 foreign exchange. Discos are allowed to charge only 190. The difference between 190 in the foreign exchange and the 305, that is not going to be collected. You have to remove from the books of the discos. That is a fact. So if we do what we're doing, we're supposed to do, people who have money, they will come to Nigeria. There's no reason why people will not come. But we need money that are long term, not the money from Oga Bank. The money, long-term money, that will have 5 years monitoring period and to 20 years repayment period. Not this kind of money from Nigeria.
Thank you. Can I ask Mr. Obo to chime in?
Okay. From the generation perspective, let me see, because I think there is a misunderstanding about the government intervention, 701 billion, 600 billion, and people are calling it subsidy. I mean, subsidy goes to when you have determined what your tariff is, you determine what the consumers are to pay, and if you are not able to pay, then you can bring the balance. That's when government comes in and says, we can pay this balance. But what government did, clearly, and let's be very clear about that, the generation companies have agreement with RUMU at Ambet. Sorry, RUMU, I'm using it.
RUMU left Ambet a while ago.
With Mbet.
Okay, no severance yet.
Yes, yeah. So he's still there. So they have agreement with them, and they say we supply electricity, and when we supply, you pay us. Down the line, RUMO has on-sale agreement with the distribution companies. RUMO has issues with the distribution companies. Mbet, sorry. RUMO is okay. Mbet has issues with the distribution companies, so it's not able to collect the money. So Mbet owes the generation companies. Mbet is owed by government. Government now came to bail Mbet out on behalf of the Gencos. So pay the Gencos. That's what was done. So it's not a subsidy. It's paying the Gencos what is owed to Gencos. Then it's not left for Mbet and Discos to sort out their own problem. So it's not subsidy. Let's get that straight, please. I'm sure Mr. Shell sitting beside you also knows that that's what's happening. Okay. So that's on that. Okay, that's the intervention I want to make and to clarify. They have discussed the single buyer model with my friend UG many times, and I've said clearly that the Act does not provide, it's just by default, because it's comfortable for everybody to be owed by government. Government debt is not bad debt. So the Gencos are more comfortable dealing with government, which is not how it's intended to be. The truth remains that the Act clearly provides from onset 3 sets of buyers: the distribution companies, when eligible customers are declared, and of course the trading licensee, the embed. So there was no time where it was designed, we designed single buyer model. Unfortunately, we fell into single buyer now for some reasons. Thank you. Yeah.
So let's go to the last round of questions. I think we have this 7 minutes. Okay, I'll start with Rumundaka, then I'll go this way. Go ahead. Sure, okay. Just Hold on.
My name is Abolo Mokwe Rashid. I work with TCN. My question is to the CEO, Ikeja. I'm glad that none of the panelists is against intervention by government and cost-reflective tariff. Now, I want to take something from here because you hardly get discourse coming to this forum. If government gives this, what will the discourse give in return? What is your view on recapitalization of the discourse, escrowing of cash collections of the discos, and cash waterfalls? Cash waterfalls is like what you collect, in my definition, what you collect, you share it based on MITHO methodology. That is, you pay so that the Gencos and TCN and other participants in the value chain will get their money. What's your view on this? What's your view on using the funds obtained from recapitalization in reducing ATC and C losses? And then, just 1 minute, please. Enumeration of customers afresh by NEC. What is your view on it? And then finally, this is to any of the participants. Indexing of the tariff against inflation rates and exchange rates, and charging a fuel cost on based on commercial rates is terribly affecting us. So how do we make the intervention such that, I know it's going to be a bit complicated, but how do we make our intervention such that the gas prices are given to the plants at marginal rates, so that the subsidy that government is paying will be paid to the oil companies, those that provide the gas, so that is the difference between the marginal price and the full cost of gas. The difference will be given to the oil companies because the money is not coming back anyway.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Question, Rumun Dakar? Not really.
Elder, just a quick question. The 701 and 601 billion, 600, are they loans? Are they grants? Are they subsidy? 213 billion, there was something with the discourse that made them like a loan, so they paid back. So what is it? Is it loan or is it a grant? If it's a loan, who is going to pay back?
Okay, thank you. The gentleman in the glasses and the hat over there, please. Yes.
I'm Sholai Fremuluwanuga. I'm a lawyer and an arbitrator. Now, my question is a quotation from Shakespeare. Says, and that is, you provoke the desire and you take away the performance. Government will say a lot about having power. And then when it comes to the custom aspect of it, and you increase the tariffs by 45%. So shouldn't we be sitting down and really come to the basics and tell everybody that, look, let us take away the elephant in the room. Government, do you really want this sector to work? If you want it to work, then let's remove every red tape. Falake, be careful what you ask for. Do you want the minister now to proclaim an era of competition in this industry? In other words, should we go into the last phase of privatization? Is that what you are clamoring for? I really would like to know.
Okay, Sheung, let's Sheung ask a question and then.
My name is Sheung Amoda. I'm in TCN. So the question I want to ask is, I want to take this opportunity to ask, the lawyers in the room and the lawyers on the panel, and including the moderator. So Section 76 of the EPSR Act talks about cost-reflective tariff. It's a mandate. It's not an option. So now, but people keep saying government said this, government said, but there is no instrument to that effect. So if anybody knows where the instrument came that government said we should not implement Section 76, because in every discussion we keep talking about we cannot do cost reflective tariff, but it is not really clear where the instruction came from. And I think as a sector, we owe it to ourselves to go and look for this instrument that gave the directive so that, so that the other regulators can be guided, because it just came out from nowhere. And when we keep reminding people, Section 76 says you must do this. Of course, I'm not saying there are many tariff designs. So one of the problems also, we have maintained the old tariff, NEPA tariff structure. So maybe we should be more flexible instead of coming up with what's it called. The government said something that there is no instrument, no agent of the government actually said anything to that effect. So, but if somebody knows where an agent of the government came out since 2015 to say, oh, there must no, Section 76 must not be implemented, then they should tell us. It will be helpful so that we can know the root cause of this problem. But I think we owe it to the government of the federal government, of Nigeria, not to be saying something that he didn't say when it comes to this issue of cost reflective tariff.
Okay. So the gentleman over here, so that we can get the panelists.
My name is Ayuba Matthew.
Okay.
My question goes to Folake. Before the question, do you realize that the rage out there for every disco is your mode of operation? Estimated billing. Your estimated billing has no human face. I can't have one room or one shop with just a fan and you give me 30,000 as estimated billing and you tell me that it's because of the load from the transformer. When you check the load on the transformer, meaning if you have 50 households using that particular transformer, if you build them accordingly, do you know what each individual uses? So you must break it down to each individual household, or else if I have just a fan in my room and a bulb and you bring 30,000, the reaction of that person, you will never like it. He will not pay. That's just the truth.
Okay.
And this goes down to your records with all the MDAs. When you present your records, they are owing 80 billion. When you go through it, because you didn't build them via metering, you always have issues. So can you put a human face to your estimated billing?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, let me come back to the panelists. There's a question from, I know there are a lot of questions for Folake, but let me have Elder Boma clear this question from Rumu, which is whether the interventions by the government, at least the proposed one, is either a loan, grant, or what form is it going to take? And if it's a loan and it's going to be paid back, who's going to pay it back?
The 701 billion is a loan. The 600, if it comes through, will also be a loan. It's a loan requested by the federal government through the bulk electricity purchaser. Yeah, that's NBET.
Okay.
The obligor is NBET. The guarantor is the federal government. And as I speak to you, they are living up to the loan obligations. Thank you.
I'll go quickly and I'll ask, I will ask Mr. Ogbo, who is, in addition to being the MD, NDP, she's also a lawyer, to address Sheo's question on Section 76. Keeping in mind that a lot of times we say the federal government,
Yeah.
but there are different entities within the federal government and sometimes with differing views. So can you address that?
I think Sean is perfectly right, correct. Section 76 talks about cost reflective tariff. It also talks about balancing the interest of the consumers and, of course, the investors as well. You're also right. I haven't seen any document from any agency saying, any government agency saying that this the regulator should not set a cost reflective tariff. I think it's squarely within the doorstep of the regulator to determine what is cost reflective. I mean, putting into consideration all the factors as provided under the Act. But be that as it may, one of the principles, again, very basic principle of effective regulation is accountability as well. The regulator might be independent, yes, he's independent of the government, but it's also very accountable to the government of the day. You don't wake up and slam the citizens with some figure as you increase rates and the responsible government will be watching you. No, so if you want to increase rates, you must carry the government along. I don't know what interactions has gone on between them. Perhaps that is, maybe that's where it is coming from. But I know a number of us have asked the question, what are the components of this your tariff? We know the 2015 tariff, the models, I mean, the components, some algorithms there have changed. I mean, we talked about exchange rate, we talked about, you know, even the volume that should be the basis of determining the unit cost. I mean, 5,000 megawatts, we have no, I don't think there's any 1 month we achieve 5,000 on a straight line with supply consumers. So all that changed. But what we're saying again is you have to be very transparent, which is also one of the principles of effective regulation. How do you arrive at these customer numbers? What is the customer number? They're telling us about 8 million consumers in customers in Nigeria. Some people, I don't know, also feel that that is grossly underreported. It can be 8 million. So data is very, very essential. It's very important. So all that is required, and I think any responsible government will require, is you are setting this tariff, be as transparent as possible. Let me see it, so that if, we are political office holders, if we think the rate shock will be high, the government might one way or the other come in. But let's be sure that this is the actual cost of delivering power to end users.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I'll let Folake have the last word. I know
Yeah.
there are questions around both estimated billing and also if the discos were capitalized, what exactly would you be spending monies on? 2 minutes. I know that's not enough time, but let's encapsulate.
Okay. I think I'll start with, I think the man that asked me about what am I clamoring for. First of all, let me just set the record straight. Based on the topic of what we're discussing today, I think that it's important as a disco to ensure that I at least explain the realities of the disco. And I think that's what I spent a lot of time doing. And if you notice, for every time I speak, I maintain it's a shortfall. Why is there a shortfall? This is the reality of the disco. Once we understand the reality of the disco, which is the last man on the value chain, because that disco is the one that feeds everyone. That's the honest truth. And if we do not understand the issue, well, yeah, you would say it's the one that's owing, but it's the one that's collecting on behalf of everyone. If we don't understand the constraints and the reality of that last man, then we can't really solve the power problem. That's all I'm trying to achieve. I don't know if that answers my question. Now, the problem we're in today didn't happen today. It happened over a long time. So even if you give cost reflected today, tariffs today, you're not going to solve the problem today. So what am I saying? That we need to compartmentalize everything and break it down. What needs to be done? So the metering asset provider scheme is a good initiative that is meant to solve a problem. Make that initiative work, because if it works, when you then have a cost reflective, because the consumers have meters, there's nothing is transparent. All the discourse we're doing is trying to ensure that the integrity of the meter is not compromised. So they're going after people that are trying to tamper with the meter or people that are trying to steal energy, and you're working with the government to put in legislation that makes sure that deters people from stealing. I don't know if I've communicated, but in that regard, that's what I'm trying to say. For estimated billing methodology, there is, like I said, is an estimate, and there's a method to the madness. We just don't take the energy on a transformer and just bill everybody on the meter. No, we don't do that. I can speak about Ikeja Electric. First thing we did was enumeration. Enumeration is critical. And what does enumeration mean? Enumeration doesn't mean just counting the customers. Enumeration entails counting the number of households, counting confirming the sort of activities that happen in that household. And when you plug all that information and enumeration into the model, it automatically shows you the load, for example, assessment of the category of customers in that bracket. For the one that you said, if you have a single bulb, if I have a transformer that has 80% of commercial consumers and I have a 20%, the model helps you separate those outliers, and the rate that they will get will be different from the commercial. So it's not just a blanket. I guess, I mean, time is gone, but pretty much I don't know if I was able to communicate how the estimation works.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Folake. Let's quickly give our panelists a round of applause. I think that this is a very robust discussion, the issue of financial intervention in the sector, and it's something that we can continue to debate for the next hour if we decide to remain here. But just to summarize, again, in the context of the subject matter, we've talked about, broadly speaking, capitalizing the discourse, because at the end of the day, they're the last mile entity between the consumers and the rest of the value chain. We've heard about the need for an accountability framework, especially in the context of the interventions by the government. And then lastly, in order to make all of these, the interventions and whatnot, impactful, there's a need for regulatory consistencies so that when decisions are made, we can follow through and get the results that we seek in this process. And on that note, I would like to bring this to a close, as is the usual practice, and I would like to invite Godswill Ugochukwu to give the vote of thanks.
A round of applause, please, for the moderator and the esteemed panelists. Thank you so much for taking out the time to come sit with us. As well, to every one of us, this time of the year, we understand that the schedule is really tight, but we thank and appreciate all of us for taking out the time to come sit with us. From our side, we thought this topic was really very important because, just like he already said, you know, pointing fingers, right? That's the easiest approach to take to these things. But we genuinely understand that if we realize the challenges that we have, you know, we've mentioned it all, regulatory inconsistencies, what have you, the tariff, you know, metering and what have you. If we understand the basics and understand how we can all work together, it's a value chain as much as I know. And, you know, all our support is definitely needed. So we thank you so much for coming. We'll continue to take this work a little further to ensure that at the very end, we find a more sustainable solution. We thank the government and the CBN for the efforts that have been put in play, but we realize that you know, going forward, we have to find a more sustainable way to deal with the real issues and be able to get us some more power. On behalf of Nextier Power, and of course, our very generous sponsors, MacArthur Foundation and the Heritage Bowl Stiford Nigeria, we thank you so much and we wish you Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you.